I am Dr. Daryl Appleton. I work primarily in the United States, but also all over the world with people who are in high performing capacities. So I work with them as a performance coach. I'm also a licensed mental health counselor. I work primarily in the hospitals right now with the Brown University General Surgery Department and their staff. So right now I'm in-house at Brown University as their wellness correspondent, and we do a lot of lectures on wellness, things like how to manage toxic workplaces to self-care styles specifically for those in healthcare, because it is very different. I also work with a lot of nurses, doctors, surgeons, administrators personally and one-on-one. So we do a lot of advocacy for the medical industry as a whole, talking about how to make our systems better, how we can give more to the people who are giving so much of themselves to their patients. Because there's a lot of research on caregiver fatigue, and we need our healthcare workers to be in tip-top shape if we're going to expect them to really be able to deliver what they can to the patients that they're providing for. So my views on self-care are really kind of conflicting sometimes. I believe in self-care. I think it's necessary. We absolutely need to care for ourselves. If you're not going to care for yourself, there is nobody else that is going to care for you. So I believe in this ability to be almost selfish, which literally means putting yourself first. I believe in that. Self-centered means everyone else, you think everyone else should put you first. That's not right. That's not necessarily the case. But I do believe in that. I do think that self-care has gone off the wayside with this era of influencers and social media. Self-care isn't necessarily a bubble bath or buying yourself this latest product. That can be a part of self-care, but I do think that these end up being band-aids on bullet holes. We absolutely need to understand the origins of what makes us feel healthy or unhealthy. We really need to explore some of these things on a deeper level than just cake and binge watching a series or something like that. So I think that self-care is absolutely necessary, but I believe a lot of times that it gets misconstrued and all of a sudden it just becomes either more things we need to do or we're not actually fixing the problem and it gets a little bit worse. So specifically for healthcare professionals, self-care looks different because we are constantly caring for other people. We are constantly giving all of ourselves into our jobs in a way that other professions might not necessarily have to do. So we need to really take a step back and understand who we are as people, as individuals, and how that relates to what we do as a job. I tell my clients all the time, what you do is not who you are. It's a piece of it, but sometimes with healthcare providers, the line isn't necessarily as clear as an accountant or somebody in the corporate field. So when we're talking about self-care strategies specifically for healthcare workers, we really need to look into who you are. And there is a lot of research, especially Bill Hetler, and he talks about these ideas of wellness and these different almost compartments that fit into a wellness wheel. So I like to use this a lot, especially with my healthcare workers, to look at the different dimensions of wellness. So there's social wellness, meaning not just are you with people, which in a pandemic or in the world that we've been living in for the last couple of years is a little bit different and looks a little different and is a little bit harder, but the quality of your social interactions. Who are you around? If you have people at work that are really negative, research says that you're more likely to assimilate to that pack and be a little bit more negative yourself. So the quality of your social interactions matter. Intellectually, we need wellness. We need an element of learning in order to be fully well. So what are you doing outside of work, outside of learning about your profession? Do you have a hobby? Are you learning a different trade? Are you engaging in your knowledge in another field? Even on a small level, that's stuff that can help with, statistically, it can help with wellness. There's also the mental and the emotional wellness of understanding how you think, how you feel, what you need, the types of rest, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit. Obviously, physical wellness is something that we talk about 80% of the time. So not just how you're eating, how you're sleeping, how you're eating, but also like what you're doing with that, how you're elevating it. So the quality of sleep, the quality of your workouts, the quality of the food that you have. These are things that also are really important in the physical dimension of wellness. There's also this spiritual aspect. Now, whatever you believe in spiritually, this means something bigger than yourself. So a lot of times in healthcare, we get what we need because we know we're doing something good for a greater population. It's much different than some of the, again, accountants that I talk to about their purpose or their passion in their job. So making sure that our passion stays centered when we're talking about our wellness with our work or the wellness in our home. Occupational wellness. If you're finding you love your job but hate your administration, or if you love your job but you're really starting to question the department you're in. These are things to think about because workplace wellness matters. Doesn't mean quit your job. It just means ask exploratory questions to your administration and see if you can't make some changes internally, or see if you can't get any answers before deciding that this necessarily isn't the right fit for me. So if you look at these different dimensions, you'll start to see a bigger picture of wellness as a whole, which I think really will help influence our self-care styles and make it a little bit more purposeful moving forward. So making self-care a habit is probably the hardest part. And motivation is something that we talk about a ton. How do I get motivated? How do I stay motivated? How do I motivate others? So implementing these tactics to making them stick, again, depends on who you are as an individual or who your teams are if you're trying to implement them with your teams. The basis of all human behavior is what's in it for me. So if you can get your team to understand the value for them in doing a self-care strategy or presenting it to your children in a way that they feel like they're getting a benefit from it, statistically, people are more likely to do what you're asking of them. It's hard when we're doing it to ourselves because we know we're kind of tricking ourselves, or we know, that's something that we can talk ourselves in and out of. So it's important to understand how we best work. Every brain is different. Every person is different. So if you need to do something very much in the morning, if you are a morning person and you start your day off and it sets the tone for your day, your self-care strategies in the morning might need to be a little bit heavier. So an example of this might be you're making your bed, you're journaling in the morning, or you're meditating. And meditating doesn't mean you sit in silence. Sometimes meditating means you're taking reflective breaths, or you're doing square breathing, where you're inhaling and exhaling the length of a square. Meditation can also mean you're having thoughts enter your head, but you're also letting them go without them sticking. So meditation doesn't necessarily always look like what we see in the movies or even what we read about. But again, if you are a morning person, you might need a morning ritual. And anytime we start to do things over and over and we create that pattern, it becomes a habit. And again, the research says it usually takes about 14 days. So stick with it. Again, working out, stuff like that. Sometimes people are very much morning people. If you are more on the nighttime side, this is a great way to transition right from work to home. Meaning, if you are trying to go to the gym, for instance, which is one of the big things that people tell me about as one of their New Year's resolutions or what they're trying to do better, keep your gym clothes in your car. Get changed at the hospital, get changed at your the home that you're working at, or whatever it is, or bring your clothes and get changed at the gym before you even go home. Make sure your self-care strategy is external to your house if you're finding that when you get home, your motivation starts to dip and you just want to watch TV, take a shower, go to bed. So knowing yourself and setting up different ways around some of these booby traps that we set for ourselves is also a really great way to work smarter and not harder when we're talking about self-care. I think when we're talking about support, it looks different and it's necessary. So if you have a gym buddy, a running friend, if this is somebody that you call when you're feeling low, even, support absolutely can matter. And I look at friendship, if we're talking specifically about individual support or group support, I almost look at friendship as different medications, if you think about it, right? If you were taking, I don't know, if you were taking an Oxycontin for your allergies, something is wrong. That's not the right medication to take for that ailment. Friends are the same way. Know your friends and know what they provide for you in a way that's healthy. So if you have a friend that is constantly going to talk you out of going to the gym, but going to the pub instead, you might not want to call that person when you're looking for motivation. You might want to call the person that actually has the cure to what's ailing you. You want to call your friend that is really motivated. And if you can't find one of those people, Facebook groups are really great for this, or even within your workplace. There's a lot of people with the fitness apps and the trackers, the step trackers that they like to do challenges on. Online, there's a ton of really great resources if we're going to use social media to our benefit here. So things that running groups they have around the world. I know there's a great app called Couch to 5K that helps, at least here in America, they have it, that helps people get training from no running training at all and getting them ready to run a 5K. So if you really look into it, there are things out there. But I guess my thing in this is there needs to be intention behind it. If you really want something, there needs to be those intentional steps that you're taking to get it. And you're not just talking to the person that's going to talk you into the pub, or you're not just going to go home and constantly forget your gym clothes. Because if you were my client, I would say, why are you getting in your own way? How do we get you out of your own way? Because you said you wanted this, but you're almost actively working against it. So I think that support is a really important piece, and it's necessary because we can't do it on our own. That's a really great thing, because you're right, not everybody has that support. And sometimes when we don't have support, having an alarm on our phone, or for me, I like to have lists everywhere, having an agenda or a calendar up on your refrigerator, anything that can remind you of your tasks, keeping it very present focused, keeping it very in front of you. I think that's also a really great way if you're somebody that's not necessarily social or likes to do it a little bit better alone. There's things like that that can absolutely help. Your fitness apps, your Apple Watches or your fitness trackers can also help with that. But you want to diversify. Don't lean too heavily into one thing, because if that falls through, you want to make sure you have options, just like anything else in life. You want to make sure that you have multiple ways of solving a singular problem. So anytime you're starting to not feel like yourself, anytime you're starting to feel more blah, people usually come to me when they're not feeling so great. So if you are thinking about reaching out to somebody for help, your body and your brain will tell you when it's time. We usually ignore those voices. We usually ignore those cues, but there's absolutely a pattern that we do have when we're kind of spiraling out, or we're slipping down, or we're finding that we're not being as productive as we normally are. So I guess a few questions to ask yourself are, am I happy with where I am right now? With my weight, with my job, with my life? And if you can't answer that question, or if it feels like a complicated question to answer, explore that. That's something worth exploring. A lot of times people will think that they constantly need to be thriving. That's not necessarily the case. We're probably thriving only 20% of the time. The different levels after that would be surviving and stabilizing, if thriving's over here and we all try to thrive. But sometimes we need to know the difference of when we're just trying to survive, meaning sometimes after the holidays, you're just trying to survive with your finances, getting back to work, trying to get back into the swing of things. If you've had a loss in your family, you might just be surviving at that point. You might just be trying to make things normal again. Most of our time should be spent in stabilizing. And again, I don't think we think about that much. But in healthcare, if we're looking at it, a stabilized patient is a healthy patient. We don't need our patients to thrive and exceed our expectations all the time. We need them not to just be surviving or have a failure to thrive. We need them just to stabilize so we can do the procedures that we need to on them, that we can help rehab them the way that we need to. So I think that there's something really important that even in our lives, we need to stabilize ourselves. So if you're feeling like things in your life aren't stable, if you feel like your marriage is not in a great place, or your relationship with your family, or work, weight, friends, intellectual stimulation, it's not necessarily a bad thing. The reason why we have feelings is to bring awareness to something in our life that might be a pain point potentially if it's a not so good feeling. So that's why feelings exist. It's to raise awareness. So understanding your feelings, being able to explore them, being able to name them and understand them, we can help ourselves normalize and navigate through them. So I think that's a really important piece of asking yourself these questions. Am I happy? Is this where I want to be? What would I do if I were doing things differently? How would that look? These are all really great ways to see if you need more self-care, or actually assessing like life is good and we need to take a step back and stop trying to push thriving all the time. Sometimes we need to, again, just enjoy where we're at and be present in that moment. Sure, your body will crave iron if you have an iron deficiency. Like, our bodies are very good at telling us what we need. We're just not good listeners. We don't listen all the time. So when our bodies tell us that we need something, and we try to explain it some other way. I think there's a meme online that says like, why do I have this headache? It's like, oh, I haven't eaten in 12 hours and I'm on my 5th cup of coffee. It couldn't be that. I couldn't be that. That's why I have my headache. It must be something else. I must be dying. I need to check WebMD. But sometimes it's Occam's razor. Sometimes the most simple explanation is the one that's actually correct. So yes, I believe absolutely listening to your body, understanding what it's saying to you, and talking back, having a conversation with yourself is a healthy thing to do in a lot of ways. So there's different types of rest, and it helps us if we understand what they are, so we can again implement what we need when we need it. Just like the friendship thing, you're not going to call that one friend who's not going to motivate you because you're trying to be motivated. You don't want to engage in a type of rest that you don't need, because it's actually not going to help you. So physical rest is the one that we think of the most, literally putting your body not in motion, laying down, not moving, things like that. But the other types of rest are mental rest. If you are in a position where you're making decisions for a lot of people all of the day, you might go home at night and your significant other might say to you, what do you want for dinner? And it feels like the most aggravating question in the world. And you kind of shut down, and maybe you've even had fights over it. And that's because you're making decisions all day long. So explaining to your partner, the dinner question is a hard one for me because I come home after making decisions all day long. I just need rest from making any more decisions. I need to have some mental rest. So sometimes we can't get away from decision making, but being able to strategically plan things where we don't have to make as many decisions for eating, resting, plans, whatever that is, trying to get it out of the way, or delegating that responsibility to someone else can be helpful and allow you some mental rest. Emotional rest, when we're talking about healthcare workers especially, there's a lot of emotions that go into caring for somebody, especially if you're doing end of life stuff or ICU things or even NICU stuff. Like, there is a lot of emotional transference that happens from caring for one person to another. And there's actually research that supports that when we care about the people we're caring for, they do get better because they can feel it. They can take on that energy, and it helps them visualize a healthier life, or it helps them know that they're loved and supported, and they actually do get better. And it's amazing things, but it does put a drain on us. So emotionally, sometimes we might go home and not have enough left over for our family, our children, our significant other, our friends. That's why it's important to, when you're not working, to not be at work. So being able to rest from the emotional caretaking at work by not doing it at home, or again, by delegating it in a way where you can separate the two. So for instance, when I come home after talking to people all day, being, a psychotherapist and a coach, I say to my husband, and we have 9-month-old twins, I say, give me 20 minutes. I need to just shower. I need to clear my head. And then I want to hear all about your day. If somebody comes into my space after a long day of talking, I'm not going to be the best I can for them because I don't have that element of rest. And 20 minutes is still rest. 20 minutes is nothing to sneeze at. It's nothing to push off to the side. Rest doesn't need to be for hours and hours. Sometimes it needs to be in small chunks. There's also creative rest. If your job is something that constantly is pushing you to create more content, whether that's something on the social media side, or if you are constantly being creative in how to solve problems, or if you're in a very creative career, maybe somewhere else in your life, where you're literally an artist or an entertainer or something of the sort. Creative rest is necessary, where you can't possibly be creative all the time. So if you have a really artistic eye, helping other people pick out their outfit or design their space after you've been doing it all day might just feel like another job, and it sucks the passion out. So you might want to rest from that as well. And then there's also this kind of spiritual rest, where we are resting from being anything other than where we are in the moment. And you can rest into spirituality, I suppose, whatever your choice of spirituality is, or you can rest from it, in the sense of it's not devoid from your life, but you don't need to be doing anything in that moment. You can just be and enjoy being in where you are. I suppose it's the ultimate lesson in mindfulness of, I'm sitting here, I'm observing it, I'm taking it all in. Hopefully you're practicing your gratitudes around it, but it also helps you from just moving from one thing to another, and it's just another problem, task, thing to solve, person to talk to, and it allows you to take some rest and just be a human being for a second or two. Sensory rest, especially if you have children, sometimes it's just constant noise. We know if you're working in the operating room or in the hospitals, or in some of these other care facilities, nursing homes, there's constant noise happening, even if it's low grade in the background, kind of murmurings, but there's always beepings, there's always pagings happening. There's a lot of things that happen, especially in healthcare. And then to go home to potentially children, or I'm from New Jersey and I'm an Italian, like we have a lot of loud family members. So sometimes you just need quiet, and please don't underestimate what quiet can do for you. So I love to tell people that their transition from work to home is incredibly important. And the pandemic has made this even harder when people actually work from home. But if you are transitioning from work to home, and you are taking your car, bus, bike, walking, whatever it is, however you physically get from one building to the next, I want you to think of that time as time where you're literally transitioning. So allow that to be a sensory rest for you, where you put your headphones on and maybe you're listening to calming music, or maybe you're not engaging in the small chit chat that you normally would with your carpool, or maybe you're not listening to a podcast because you've talked to people all day, or you've been listening to patients all day. So sensory rest might be something that you can actively engage in while you're transitioning from work to home. So that way, when you step in the door, you can be fresh for your family, or fresh for yourself, even your pets, where you don't have to feel the burden of, this is now just more that I'm doing. Again, because you're caretakers, the caretaking doesn't just stop when you leave the building. You're most likely caretaking for people in your lives as well. So using the small times that we have to rest in these different ways can make all the difference. So when we talk about rest, I'm going to use stress as kind of its counterpart, its nemesis. So when we don't have enough rest in our lives, when we are feeling like we are burning out, stress starts to creep up into the brain and into the body in a chemical called cortisol. Now, when cortisol comes into the body, it wreaks havoc on it. And for a lot of you, I'm probably saying things that you already know. But what's interesting, and not a lot of people know, is a few things happen specifically in the brain when there's too much cortisol, when there's too much stress. The first thing that happens is that your hippocampal volume shrinks. This is your memory center. So the way I know I'm really stressed out is I'll be holding my keys in my hand saying, like, where are my keys? I don't know where my keys are. If it gets really bad, I'll be on the phone talking to the other person on the phone saying, I can't find my phone. And 9 times out of 10, it's my mom. And she's usually saying, like, you're probably holding it because you're talking to me on it. So our memory center starts to shrink, where we forget to respond to that email, or that pickup at our kids' school, or the birthday of our best friend, or whatever it is, big, small, and it starts to create more stress, which again, the cycle then deepens and intensifies. So first thing, hippocampal volume shrinks. The next thing is that your fear center, your amygdala, starts to fire in all of these ways, because stress is directly linked, or cortisol is directly linked to the amygdala to activate the fight or flight center. So in cave person times, this would save us from saber-toothed tigers and attacks and things like that. But in today's day and age, we're not necessarily in survival mode, although that part of our brain triggers and it makes us feel like we are. So our memory center is shrinking. We are reacting to things rather than responding to them. And we're thinking that it's slightly life or death, or we are running from problems or running towards them with aggression or anger, or avoiding them completely. And then the third thing that happens is that your prefrontal cortex, which is your learning, development, decision-making, doesn't fire the way that it normally would, meaning you're not making decisions as you potentially would because you're overwhelmed with stress, your memory center is not working, and your decision-making is falling apart. This is how people get into really bad cycles. This is how people start again to respond to things or react to things rather than having the appropriate response to them. Our job when we're really stressed is to understand that we're stressed. We need to name that we're stressed. We need to normalize it to the situation. We need to look around saying like, okay, is this something to be stressed about? Yes, no, maybe, let's figure it out. And then we need to navigate through it of what are my coping skills? What do I need to get done here? And when we can start to do that, we feel a little less crazy, a little less out of our head, a little less that the world is happening to us, and we hopefully start to feel a little bit more in control. Our brains by nature are negative creatures. They are designed to be negative because it kept us alive. Nobody in the history of human behavior has been kept alive by saying everything's great, everything's fine, and not being a little bit anxious. It just doesn't happen. If you look at the research, it supports that we are fairly negative in the way that we think and feel. So we actively need to combat against that. There's actually a study I was reading the other day that 2/3 of the neurons in our amygdala is directly associated with interpreting bad news. So in your fear center, we interpret bad news based on these neurons whose sole job is to do so. So that's why when you're hearing information, you might automatically think the worst. It's not because you're inherently negative as a person or as a soul. It's because as a being, we are designed and hardwired to think of the worst case scenario first for survival, even though we are not necessarily being threatened with death. So in healthcare, I'm sure you all can kind of attest that this does happen because for patient safety, for making sure we know what the worst case scenario is and working our way up, that is something that is fairly common practice in a lot of places. So it can trickle into your everyday life, and it can make you more pessimistic, and it can put a drain on your system and on your emotional funds if it is not capped. Rest is a really great way to have that happen. Self-care is a really great way to have that happen or not happen. If you're trying to not let negativity or pessimism or bad feelings ruin everything in your life. It's really hard because I think that when we think about therapy or coaching or psychology, people usually come to us thinking, make the bad feelings stop, but that's not the goal. The goal of therapy, the goal of coaching, the goal of any of these things is to not stop bad things from happening or to avoid them from happening. It's to know what to do when bad things happen or when they arrive, because they will. It's life, it happens. But giving people the skills to navigate through it and feel confident in themselves that they can handle something, or they know what supports to reach out to if they feel like they can't handle something. There's no shame in that. But we need to change our mindset that this isn't about avoiding every toxic person in our life. This isn't about avoiding every toxic workplace that we go into. There's a lot of stuff coming up now about even toxic positivity, where good vibes only. There's no such thing as good vibes only. When people say things like this too shall pass, it's a very lovely sentiment, but it's actually toxic positivity because we're not actually validating that this person's going through a tough time. And it's not because people are bad that are saying it, or like, let go and let God, or, your tough times don't last, tough people do. Like, these are all really, really great sayings in their own way. But if we're not taking into account a person's struggle, if we're not actually seeing this person and hearing what they're saying and validating that it's difficult, it can do more harm than good. It doesn't mean that they're not going to get through it. It doesn't mean that, they can't let go and let whoever, you believe in. There's something about understanding someone's struggle and seeing and validating that for them, that makes the human connection so much deeper, but it also helps us be more realistic and actually overcome things much stronger than just slapping on like, quit your job, it's terrible, or leave that person, they're awful. That might be the ultimate case. You might actually have to end up doing that, but hopefully you're doing your work in the meantime. So you're not just going from relationship to relationship or job to job because one or two bad things happened. I suppose if we were looking for an adage on it, it would be, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to take into account that like sometimes bad things absolutely happen, but it doesn't mean that everything around us is bad. Yeah, I don't think that there is anything real about work-life balance. I think that if you are really trying to balance your, sometimes in healthcare, 60, 70, 80 hour a week of working with 60, 70, 80 hours a week of resting or life, I don't know how you do that. I don't know what that looks like. I have no idea how that's actually done or balanced. And if you know how, call me, DM me. I want to know how you balance everything evenly. I think that we try to do it all rather than focusing on what needs to get done. So I've come up with this term of, I believe more in work-life sway. And sway really is just this seeking what aligns you, meaning if you have something at work that needs to be done, sometimes you need to sway into life. Sometimes you need to lean into it or into work. You need to make sure that life needs to be a little bit on hold. You might be 45 minutes late to that dinner, but call everybody, let them know. But somebody's coding in your ER, or something terrible has happened at work that demands your attention. And those are usually very easy things. I'm sure if you called your dinner date saying like, hey, listen, like there was an emergency at work, the building's on fire, they wouldn't be like, how dare you not make it to our taco night? Like how awful of you. That's sometimes the easy stuff is like the actual crises. What tends to happen is in the middle, we need to navigate of which is more important. And I think that's where people foul it up a little bit. They need to understand that sometimes there are glass balls and sometimes there are rubber balls. And if you throw a glass ball and you don't catch it, it shatters. Meaning if you miss that meeting with your boss, or if you miss that diagnosis on your patient because you're rushing out, sometimes you can't get those things back. You might get fired. You might lose a patient. You might lose an account. But some things are rubber. If you don't send that email right now, if you drop the ball on that, if you don't send that email, it will bounce back and you can send it tomorrow morning. You don't need to miss your kid's football game because you're sending an email, or because you couldn't get off that conference call, or whatever it is. So sometimes for me, it's helping my clients navigate what are rubber balls, what are glass, and what needs to be addressed when you need it to be addressed. How do we lean into life when you need to lean into life? How do you need to lean into work when you need it to lean into work? How do you need to lean into self when you need to lean into self? How do we sway in all of these directions? So no, I think work-life balance, unfortunately, sounds really great. And these workplaces that try to promote it, I want to know how you're actually doing that. Because of the many workplaces that I've consulted with, we've come to the same agreement that there's no such thing. But we can do is teach our staff, teach our administration how to look for the signs of workplace burnout, how to understand and listen to what our workers need and what they're asking for, and deliver on that in a shared direction. But work-life balance, I don't know what that is. But I'd be open to hearing conversations about it if people feel differently. I think at the end of the day, when we are talking about self-care in a way that actually has some legs to it, it comes down to, can you tell me how you're feeling? Can you name it? What is it? Can you understand its context in the situation? Can you normalize it to me or to yourself? And do you have the techniques and the skills to make it better, or to mitigate it in some sort of way, or make a plan to have a plan about it? Can you navigate through it? So the main thing that I work on with my clients and with companies as a whole sometimes is this idea of name, normalize, navigate. And when we can do that, we can set ourselves free from a lot of undue burden, from a lot of undue stress by doing unproductive things and actually not fixing anything. But I think if you're going to start somewhere, start with the naming portion. If you can't tell me how you feel, if you come home mad from work and you can't tell me why, or you can't tell me what triggered it, that's the place to start. What was it that got you feeling upset like this? Because once we know what that is, then we can start to talk about it on a different level than just, I'm annoyed, don't talk to me. Same thing with life. If you can't tell your partner what it is about their behavior or about an interaction that upset you or made you feel embarrassed or sad, then you're not necessarily going to fix anything. I also do some work with couples, and at the core of it, I find that people speak different languages. They say the same things, but they're speaking different languages and they don't understand each other. So getting on the same page with a shared language by helping people understand, when I say I'm sad, I don't mean I'm suicidal. When I say I'm sad, I mean I need time alone. It doesn't mean I'm isolating. So helping people to understand the operational definitions of these words that can be interpreted in many different ways. So that's why I think naming is so, so important. The normalizing, I think, is also important because it's important for us to take accountability. Sometimes we overreact. And a lot of times I'll ask my clients, okay, was your response appropriate to the situation in your opinion? And I have no judgment on it. They might say yes, they might say no. But if the answer is like, it wasn't appropriate, I completely freaked out on my son and I shouldn't have. I was really mad at my boss at work because we lost a patient today and it wasn't handled well. Then all of a sudden, now we're starting to get somewhere. Now we know what we need to do in terms of difficult conversations or self-care strategies or working on positive confrontation or healthy confrontation. So again, normalizing it helps us with our accountability. It helps us see things from not a first person view, but from a third person view, as almost if you were seeing somebody else act this out. How would you feel about them doing it if it weren't you? And then the navigation is all the techniques. Okay, so you're feeling panicky, so you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling stressed. What are the different things that you can do to take a step back? Do you need to get out and get some air? Because again, biologically, you're starting to not remember things correctly. Your prefrontal cortex is not working the way that it should. All of a sudden, your fight or flight is overwhelmed. How do we decompress the system a bit so you can make the right decision? How do we not fight our biologics? How do we instead allow them space to calm down and then make a decision? Or what's the best way to send this email? How do we navigate through this difficult terrain or this talk with my staff? So it can be used in any way or walk of life of name, normalize, navigate. And if you can start to do that, you unlock a lot of cages that you hold the keys to. It's no different than diagnosing. It's no different than what you and your medical team does on a day-to-day basis. You observe what the symptoms are. You're naming everything that this person has: fever, chills, nausea, diarrhea. And then we're normalizing it to, okay, did this person take a pill that they shouldn't have? Did this person have COVID? Like what situations are there? And then finally, we're navigating through it because we have a treatment plan in place. We're starting with a diagnosis. We understand what the shared intentions are for treatment for this person. So people tend to think that soft science like psychology is kind of fluffy and it's everywhere, but it's very much like hard science, where we do the same process in our diagnostic and our treatment planning. We do the same process when we're trying to figure out what is actually wrong so we can treat the problem and not just the fever. We're not trying to bring your fever down, trying to figure out what caused the fever. This is no different. And when we can start to apply our healthcare strategies to our emotional stuff, you'll start to see that you have lots of answers that you didn't think that you had. And if you need help, ask somebody, work with somebody, a coach, a therapist, somebody along those lines. You don't need to do it alone. Journaling is really great. They have lots of journaling prompts. If you're like me and staring at a blank page and writing something feels like very overwhelming. So there's lots of help out there if you need it. But there's no reason for everyone to keep feeling the ways that they're feeling and feeling like there's no escape from it. The success stories that I have are the emails that I get from my clients, sometimes from years ago. And they will say, I just want to let you know I'm doing great. And you are a huge part of that. Or I love, and every therapist coach loves this as well, when people say things like, I thought about what you said last night, or I thought about what you said in our last session. And instead of freaking out on my significant other like I normally do, I decided instead to take a breath and, go journal instead, or whatever we talked about in session. So it's not necessarily these big things in my mind of success that people go on to make $1 million because they feel more well. It's the small things of, in a moment, they recognize they had a choice to continue to live the life that they were living, that they were trying to not live, or choose something different and maybe a little bit scary, but having a different and a better outcome, and feeling really proud about their progress that way. So I love hearing stuff like that. And to me, those are the biggest successes that I could ever ask for in my clients' lives. So I would definitely say it would be things like that that would be the success stories that come to mind. I wouldn't do this work if it wasn't rewarding in some way. And I am always so honored to be a part of people's journeys and their stories, because they don't need to share their lives with me. They choose to. And I think that is the greatest honor one could ever ask for in my seat. So anytime anybody comes to me and shares their journey and their story, I'm always incredibly, I feel blessed and honored to be a part of that, and to see people and how they progress, better, worse, and different. It's always something that's part of the human experience, and it's a really wonderful thing to help people navigate through. So I'm incredibly lucky to do what I do, and have great clients and people that trust me and want me a part of their process, whether it's a company, an organization, or an individual. No, thank you for having me. And I hope this helps. I hope, if this helps one person, then I am grateful for this. I am incredibly happy to answer any questions at all. You can definitely visit me at www.drdarylappleton.com. My email's on there, or my Instagram at Dr. Daryl Appleton. And people DM me all the time. So I'd be happy to help with any questions that people have on any of the topics we talked about or more.